Hello, I'm David Bowman, the tutoring coordinator for BCSCR, or Building Communities That Support Children's Reading. And I just completed an instructional audit of all the tutors across 4 states. I read every one of the instructional reporting forms, looked at all the session logs, all of that. And one thing that I noticed was that there seems to be a lot of confusion around the instruction in fluency. What is fluency, and how do you go about helping kids to develop stronger fluency? So, because there seem to be so many since it seems like so many folks are having some confusion about this, I'm making a short video to explain to you what we mean by fluency and what seems to work. So, we're titling this Fluency: Effective and Ineffective Practices. But first, let me give you a quick definition of what we mean by fluency. So, fluency is reading aloud, obviously, with accuracy, which means correct decoding skills, with appropriate pace, which gives a sense of rhythm or the natural rhythm of the language, and appropriate expression, appropriate meaning appropriate for that particular context or that passage that the kids are reading. That gives us an idea about their understanding of the reading. So, with that definition in mind, there's really a fairly simple process to helping kids to develop fluency. Obviously, they first have to read a passage aloud, but then there has to be some chance for analysis and correction. What worked, what didn't work, where are the errors, and then to analyze those errors and correct them. So, let's say a kid stumbles on a particular passage or a particular phrase. Well, then we go back and work with that kid on rereading just that phrase, sounding out the words, analyzing the words, trying it again, and then we reread the passage. One of the main elements of helping kids to develop fluency is giving them the chance to practice doing it correctly. So any kind of a one-time through process is not going to give us that analysis, that correction, and then it doesn't give us that practice that kids need in doing it correctly. Because ultimately, we want kids to have a chance to practice doing it right, as opposed to creating bad habits that may be formed if they only go through a passage one time. So, some strategies that we can use to do this. Obviously, guided oral reading. By definition, that's what guided oral reading is. Student reads, there's some correction and analysis, and then maybe some modeling by the teacher or another student and how it's supposed to sound, and then doing it again. And it may take several times to get through a passage correctly with appropriate pacing and appropriate expression. So, that's what guided oral reading really is. So some other useful strategies for this are choral reading, where the kids are all doing it together multiple times. Echo reading, which is one does it correctly, the other one echoes it or mimics. And we do it multiple times. And any kind of practice with plays or skits or dramatic readings, all of those are good strategies for helping kids to develop fluency. So, what doesn't work? I've already alluded to these, but any kind of a one-time through reading is not going to get us that analysis, correction, and practice doing it right. If we are using flashcards or just looking at individual words, although that might help us with the decoding, it doesn't help us with the pacing and which is the rhythm, and it doesn't help us with the appropriate expression either. So, words out of context, individual words, don't get us to improvements in fluency. And similarly, anytime we're focusing on just a specific component, just the pacing, or just the expression, or just the decoding, that is also not going to get us to fluency skills, development of fluency skills, because fluency really has all three parts. So, some strategies that don't work within any kind of use of flashcards, those are individual words, might help with the phonics, but it's not going to address the other area. I see a lot of tutors doing speed drills, or kids have 1 minute to read as much as they can, and maybe we count errors or something along that line. That also doesn't, because it gives a false impression that the goal of reading aloud is to get through it as quickly as possible. It's not. It's to get through it accurately with appropriate pacing and appropriate expression. So speed drills um, create that false impression. We end up with a lot of kids who can just say a lot of words quickly, but we never have any knowledge of whether or not they actually understand what they're reading because we don't have the other parts. And then similarly to the one-time through activities, one-time through reading would be any kind of round robin reading, where a student reads a part and the next student, and the next student, the next student, and so forth. Because there's a couple of things there. One, obviously doesn't give us the correction, the analysis, and the practice doing it correctly. But it's also perhaps a little bit painful for the other kids. Now, an astute kid is going to say, okay, I know which part I'm going to be assigned to read, so I'm going to start practicing that, and I'm going to ignore what the child reading what he's saying. Um, and then if a child doesn't have strong fluency skills, can become very difficult for the other students who have to basically listen to a child struggle his way through a passage. So it's not really good for the learning process. It's not good for learning motivation. And ultimately, it doesn't give us that emphasis on correction and repeated practice leading to good habits. So the last thing I want to say about fluency is what other areas do we need to teach it with? Because as we know, skills are best taught in conjunction with other skills. So obviously we teach it in conjunction with phonics. Matter of fact, that whole analysis and correction process is really a study in phonics. We also teach it with vocabulary because kids are going to encounter new words, and perhaps those are the words that they stumble on. So it gives us a really good opportunity to look at those individual words and what they mean, which ultimately will lead us to better comprehension. So of course, we follow it up with comprehension. Now that students have read aloud, what is it about? What um, what is the author's intent here? What's happening? What do you think about it? And so forth. And then, interestingly, it actually also contributes to the development of oral language, because if we think about what oral language is, it's the appropriate use of language for a particular context. And as students become more fluent through that whole correction and repeated process, one of the things that fluency does is it contributes to an understanding of how the language is supposed to sound. What are the natural rhythms in the language? What are the natural pronunciations? And, what is the grammar? What is the syntax of the language? We often talk about people having an ear for the language. We say, wow, maybe I don't know what's wrong, but that doesn't sound right. Or that, maybe I don't know why it sounds right, but that does sound right. Well, in great part, developing that ear comes out of this fluency practice through the repeated reading, through the role modeling, through the correction and the analysis and the follow-up discussion. So there's a lot that happens with fluency, and as you can see, it actually contributes to the development of many other skills and is taught in conjunction with many other skills. So it's critical that as tutors that you're addressing fluency regularly, and hopefully this will give you some ideas about how you can also do it effectively. So thank you very much. Again, I'm David Bowman with BCSCR. Have a great day.